There are moments in a marriage that don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly. A drawer left open an inch too far, a phone screen tilted just slightly away from you, a pause before answering a question that should have had no pause at all. You notice these things and you file them somewhere soft, somewhere you don't have to look at directly. You tell yourself you're being paranoid. You tell yourself this is what 12 years of marriage feels like. Not fireworks, just two people sharing a roof and a last name and a refrigerator that needs cleaning. I was 38 years old, and I had been telling myself that story for 2 years. My name is Sarah. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of city people leave and then miss more than they expected. I met Daniel at a friend's birthday party when I was 25, and I remember thinking he was the most put-together man I'd ever spoken to. Pressed shirt on a Saturday, good eye contact. Asked follow-up questions. I married him 3 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. My father cried. My mother told me I looked like a painting. Daniel's hands were steady when he put the ring on my finger. I remember noticing that. How steady his hands were. We moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, for his job at a regional logistics firm called Hargrove & Bell. He was in corporate accounts, the kind of work that involves a lot of handshakes and quarterly dinners and trips to meet clients in Atlanta or Nashville or Dallas. I was a licensed physical therapist. I had a caseload I loved, patients I'd followed for years, a small office near Dilworth where I knew the receptionist's kids' names and birthdays. I was good at my job. I liked being good at my job. When our son Marcus was born, Daniel and I talked about childcare like rational adults. We priced out daycares, interviewed nannies, ran the numbers on my salary versus the cost of coverage. It made sense on paper, barely, for me to keep working. So I did. For 3 years, I did both things at once, and I was exhausted in the particular way that working mothers are exhausted, where you are always slightly failing at everything, because you are trying not to completely fail at anything. Then Daniel got promoted. His salary jumped 60%, and the conversation shifted in a way I didn't fully track until it had already happened. "You don't have to grind like this anymore," he told me one evening. Marcus was 2.5, and I had just put him down after a bath, and I was standing in the kitchen in wet sleeves because bath time with a toddler is exactly what it sounds like. "We can actually breathe now. You could take a break." Just for a while. A while became a year became 3. I gave up my caseload. I gave up my office. I gave up the receptionist whose kids' birthdays I knew. I told myself it was a choice. And, in some technical sense, it was. But choices don't always feel like choices when you're standing in a kitchen with wet sleeves and someone is telling you that you finally don't have to. By the time Marcus started first grade, I had been out of the workforce for 4 years. I volunteered at his school, on Tuesdays. I ran the household with the same competence I had once applied to patient outcomes. I cooked real dinners and kept the calendar and managed the contractors when we had the master bath redone. Daniel thanked me occasionally, less than occasionally. He came home later and later from the office, and I stopped tracking what time exactly, because tracking it felt like an accusation. His assistant's name was Nicole. I knew about Nicole, the way you know about a weather system before it arrives, a drop in pressure, a certain quality to the air. She'd been at Hargrove & Bell for about a year. Daniel mentioned her the way you mention someone who is just furniture in your life, casually, in passing. Nicole booked his travel. Nicole handled his calendar. Nicole was incredibly organized, he said once, with a small admiring exhale that I probably should have held onto more carefully than I did. I met her at the company Christmas party in December. She was 32, with dark hair and one of those faces that looks effortlessly composed, like she'd never once ugly cried in a parking lot. She shook my hand warmly and told me she'd heard so much about me. I smiled. I said all the right things. On the drive home, Daniel said the party went well, and I agreed that it did, and that was the entirety of the conversation. In February, I started noticing the phone. Not because he was hiding it, he was smarter than that, but because of the way he moved it. A small rotation when he set it on the counter, a deliberate placement face down on the nightstand. He'd always been someone who left his phone wherever he dropped it, screen up, ringer on. This was different. Not a confession. Just a shift in habit that sat wrong in the part of my brain that used to assess patients for compensatory movement patterns. In March, I saw a text notification when his phone lit up on the kitchen island. Just the name and the first few words before the screen went dark. Nicole. Can't stop thinking about. I stood very still. The coffee maker finished its cycle. The refrigerator hummed. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't confront him. I went upstairs, made the bed with hospital corners the way my mother taught me, and sat on the edge of it for 10 minutes, thinking about nothing at all. Then I started paying attention. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't hire anyone or install anything. I just started being more present in spaces I'd trained myself to drift through. I listened to his phone calls differently. I noticed which evenings had unexplained receipts and which didn't. I watched the way he looked at his phone at dinner, not looking at it, just aware of it, like it was a living thing in his pocket. April was when I found the bag. We were getting ready for his company's annual client summit, held that year in Nashville. Daniel had arranged for us to go together. Spouses were invited, he'd said, and he thought it would be nice to get away. I'd been quietly suspicious of the invitation, but I said yes because what was I going to say? We hadn't been anywhere together in almost a year. I was packing my carry-on the night before, a weekend bag I'd pulled from the top shelf of the closet. It was a soft-sided gray tote I'd had for years. When I unzipped it, I found something already inside. It was a small black zip pouch, the kind you'd use for cosmetics or a travel kit. I didn't recognize it. I picked it up with the dull curiosity you feel about things that don't yet have meaning, and I unzipped it. There was a thumb drive. A folded piece of paper, which I opened. It appeared to be some kind of transfer authorization, with routing numbers, account figures, and initials I didn't recognize alongside Daniel's. And beneath those, a prepaid debit card, still in its packaging, with a sticky note on the back in handwriting that wasn't Daniel's. The note said, "Hold until we land. I'll explain everything when we get there." The handwriting was rounded and neat. I'd seen it on a thank you card on Daniel's desk once, the kind of card an employee might give a manager at the holidays. I hadn't thought anything of it then. I thought something of it now. I sat on the floor of our bedroom for a long time. Marcus was asleep down the hall. The house was quiet. I turned the zip pouch over in my hands and looked at what was inside, and tried to figure out what I was looking at. The transfer authorization had large numbers on it, not household large, significantly uncomfortably large. The initials in the signature lines were DH and NC. Daniel Hartley. Nicole Cruz. I am a physical therapist. I am trained to observe, to stay calm in clinical settings, to hold a patient's fear without absorbing it. I have held that steadiness in difficult situations before. I held it now. I put everything back in the pouch, exactly as I'd found it. I zipped it closed. I set it aside. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop for 2 hours while Daniel slept. And I looked up the name of the Financial Investigative Division of the North Carolina Department of Justice. I wrote down a phone number. I took a photo of the contents of that pouch with my phone before putting it back, careful to capture the routing numbers and the sticky note and the prepaid card packaging. And then I thought about what to do with the pouch itself. Here's the thing they don't tell you about being a stay-at-home wife. You become invisible in ways that are sometimes useful. I had spent 4 years being the background of Daniel's professional life. The person who confirmed dinner reservations and thanked the right people and stood beside him at parties looking pleasant. He had stopped seeing me as someone who noticed things. That was a mistake. Nicole was driving to Nashville separately. She lived in Concord, about 20 minutes from our house, and she'd mentioned to Daniel she was bringing her car because she had family in the area. I knew this because I had been paying attention to the logistics of this trip for 3 weeks. I knew her car was a silver Hyundai Sonata. I knew she was checking into the same Marriott as us because Daniel's executive coordinator had emailed the hotel confirmation to our shared trip planning folder. A detail Daniel probably hadn't accounted for when he'd given me access to that folder for our actual travel documents. The morning of the trip, we loaded the car. I was composed and efficient. I made travel coffee. I confirmed Marcus's schedule with my mother, who was coming Tuesday. I hugged my son for longer than necessary. He said, "Mom, I need to breathe." And I laughed and let him go. At the hotel check-in, I was the one who handled the bags while Daniel took a call in the lobby. I had our bags. I also had Nicole's name from the reservation system when the front desk clerk was confirming something with Daniel. Nicole Cruz, room 412. We were on the 4th floor too. Room 408. The summit started that afternoon. Cocktail hour at 6. Dinner at 7:30. Daniel was tense in the way he got when he was performing. Hyper-aware of the room, tracking who was talking to who, calculating. I watched Nicole across the cocktail hour. She was good at her job, I'll give her that. She was smooth and gracious, and she did not once look at Daniel in a way that would have registered to someone who wasn't looking for it. But I was looking for it. And I saw the small things. The way her body oriented toward him in a room. The way she didn't approach him directly, not once, which is its own kind of discipline. At 8:15, I excused myself from the dinner table to use the restroom. I took my bag with me, which no one noticed, because I was invisible. I walked to the elevator instead. On the 4th floor, I found the housekeeping cart near the ice machine and made a decision in about 4 seconds that I have never once regretted. I walked to room 412. Nicole had left a tote bag hanging on the door handle, the kind of hook-hanging bag people use when they want housekeeping to know the room is occupied. It was unlatched. I slipped the zip pouch inside, nestled between what felt like a folded blazer and something that crinkled like a dry cleaning bag. I went back to the elevator. I smoothed my dress. I returned to the table and finished my salmon. What happened next was not immediate. These things never are. The summit included, the following morning, a compliance session for all Hargrove and Bell executives and their senior staff. The company had a new CFO who was reportedly cleaning house, and there was a mandatory ethics and financial disclosure meeting, scheduled for 9 a.m. in one of the conference rooms. I'd heard Daniel mention it with mild irritation a few weeks prior. I had filed that information in the soft place in my brain and waited. I sat in on the general programming while Daniel was in his executive sessions. At 11:17, I watched from the atrium as 2 men in business casual who I did not recognize walked toward the 4th floor conference room with lanyards that said something in small print I couldn't read. One of them was carrying a file folder that had a Hargrove and Bell logo. They were not smiling in the way of conference attendees. They were moving with purpose. Daniel found me in the atrium at 11:45. He was a particular shade of pale that I had never seen on him before. It was the pale of someone who has run calculations and come up with wrong answers. "Something's come up," he said, with Nicole. I looked at him. I waited. "Security found some things in her bag during the compliance check-in. I don't." "It's complicated. There might be some kind of misunderstanding." "What kind of things?" My voice was level. I was a woman at a hotel conference asking a reasonable question. His jaw worked. "Documents. Financial documents. A flash drive. A prepaid card." "That sounds serious," I said. Yes, it is. Was it hers?" "The stuff they found." Another calculation running behind his eyes. "They're looking into it." I picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. Outside the atrium windows, Nashville was bright and ordinary. Someone laughed somewhere in the lobby. "Daniel," I said, "why would Nicole have financial transfer documents with your initials on them in her bag?" The color that was left in his face redistributed itself in a way I found medically interesting. I'm going to need to make some calls." "Okay," I said. "I'm going to finish my coffee." He left. I sat in the atrium and I felt something that I want to be careful describing. Because it wasn't triumph, exactly. It was something quieter. The feeling of standing on solid ground after a long time of not being sure where the floor was. The details that followed came in pieces over the following days and weeks. The compliance team had flagged the documents because the account numbers on the transfer authorization corresponded to accounts that were already under internal audit. A fact I could not have known, but one that apparently Nicole and Daniel had also failed to fully account for. The prepaid card was traced. The thumb drive contained documentation of a scheme that was, from what I later understood, the kind of financial maneuvering that companies call embezzlement and prosecutors call theft. Nicole was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. She was terminated the following week. Daniel, who did not have physical possession of the documents when they were found, spent the subsequent month in an extremely expensive negotiation with both the company's legal team and his own attorney, ultimately settling a civil matter that required him to repay a significant sum and accept a separation from Hargrove and Bell. He was not criminally charged. This outcome cost him a great deal of money, most of which came from accounts I had not known existed until the divorce proceedings made their contents visible. I retained a family law attorney named Patricia, who came recommended by a colleague of my mother's. Patricia had gray hair and a calm demeanor, and she did not waste a single breath on sentiment. She told me the discovery process would surface financial information that might surprise me. And she was correct. The settlement I received, when finalized 7 months later, included enough that I was not starting over. I was starting with something. I called my old clinic director, a woman named Roberta, in May, 3 months after Nashville. I had worked for Roberta for 6 years before I left. I was afraid the call would be awkward, that too much time had passed, that I'd have to explain myself in ways I didn't have energy for. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah, I've been hoping you'd call. I went back part-time that summer, Tuesdays and Thursdays to start, covering Roberta's overflow caseload while one of her therapists was on maternity leave. By fall, I was full-time. My first week back, one of the front desk staff, a new hire named Destiny who hadn't been there when I left, asked if I'd been in healthcare long. I told her I'd been licensed for 12 years. She nodded and said I seemed like someone who'd been doing this a long time. I thanked her. I didn't explain where I'd been in the middle. Marcus took the divorce in the way that 9-year-olds take things they don't fully understand. With moments of anger and moments of surprising maturity and a lot of questions at inconvenient times. I answered what I could, honestly. Some nights were very hard. I will not pretend they weren't. Daniel and I co-parent according to a schedule that Roberta's cousin, the Mite Eater, helped us work out without too much bloodshed. He is present in Marcus's life. He is not present in mine. We exchange information about school pickups and pediatrician appointments, with the efficiency of two people who have mutually agreed to be civil. It is not warm. It is functional. Most days that is enough. His mother, Carolyn, called me 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I liked Carolyn, in the way you can like someone while also being unable to be around them without grief. She told me she was sorry. She said she had noticed things she didn't act on, and she was sorry about that too. I told her I didn't hold it against her. I meant that. She said she'd like to stay in Marcus's life. I said of course. She sends him a card on his birthday, and they talk on the phone on Sundays. This is enough. What I've learned, and I say this not as a lesson or a moral, but as a simple thing I now know, the way I know other things that I didn't know before, is that there is a particular danger in making yourself small to fit the space someone else has decided you should occupy. I did not become small all at once. It happened over years, in increments I told myself were choices. The wet sleeves. The Monday routine. The calendar. The way I stopped practicing the thing I was trained and licensed and good at because someone told me I finally didn't have to. I got to keep my name after the divorce. I'd considered going back to my maiden name, but Sarah Hartley is who I am in my professional records and my community and on my son's emergency contact card at school. I decided to keep it and let it mean something different now. A name is a name. What matters is what you're doing while you carry it. I am doing something now. Last month, a new patient was referred to me after a complicated knee replacement. She was 61, recently retired, and she told me in our intake session that she'd been nervous about starting physical therapy because she'd been out of any kind of real exercise for years, and she didn't want to look foolish. She asked if I thought it was too late to start rebuilding. I looked at her over my intake clipboard, and I thought about wet sleeves and hotel atriums and a small black zip pouch, and my first week back at the clinic and Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then full-time, and the way ground feels different when you're certain it will hold you. No, I told her. It's not too late. We start where we are.